Hi there folks, Ross G. Saunders here. I'm a privacy and cybersecurity specialist and I'm here to speak to you today about POPIA, the Protection of Personal Information Act, and how it applies to schools. For the last decade or so, I've been involved in information security committees where POPIA and GDPR and various other acts around the world have been a hot topic. And today I want to take you through a bit of an introduction as to what to expect from POPIA and how it affects a school. So without further ado, let's jump in. Right, so the first thing we need to do when it comes to data protection is talk about what exactly we are protecting, and that is personal information. Now, personal information has many definitions. The POPI definition is actually relatively long, so I'm going to take you through the Australian Act's definition because there's some key components in here that tie into any privacy law around the globe. So the Australian Act says personal information is information or an opinion, including information or an opinion forming part of a database, whether true or not, and whether recorded in a material form or not, about an individual whose identity is apparent or can reasonably be ascertained from the information or opinion. Now, what is important here is this reasonably be ascertained component. If we have, say, a name and surname on one side in one piece of information, and then we've got a surname and a phone number in another, and a phone number and a email address in another side of our information, we can put a golden thread through all of that, link it all together, and all of that becomes personal information. So that is something we need to be really, really aware of when we're looking at a school and the information we hold on learners, on teachers, on parents, because we can ascertain other people's information through that. So it's vital to have that mindset as we walk through the rest of it. Now, what we can see in POPI is POPIA has it breaks it down into 8 principles that we have to follow, or conditions as they call it in the Act. And what these are is it's these concepts that we have to prove that we are complying with. Now, the first of these is accountability. And accountability means that we are going to comply with the Act. It is having documentation in place. It's having policies in place. It's knowing where our data is. It's all the things that prove we are looking after data responsibly. The next 3 tie into each other really, really well, and that is processing limitation, purpose specification, and further processing limitation. Now, these 3 are the kind of things we see when you see privacy policies being updated. Processing limitation means that we only take the information that we need. So if we have got application forms or something like that for the school, you only put the fields that you absolutely require on that application form. Gone are the days where we would take additional information in case we need it later. Now we only take what we need. This then ties into purpose specification, where we need to say what it is we're using this information for. We need to define a purpose. So if we're collecting XYZ information, we need to have a purpose for it and be able to articulate that. The last part here, further limitation, means that if we've collected certain information for a specific purpose, we can't go and repurpose that information for something else. So if we've collected information in terms of an application form, we can't go and give that information to a marketing agency or something like that. But it even ties into the school itself, where you can't just change the purpose of, say, an indemnity form or something like that. So that's very, very important to be aware of. The next thing we talk about is information quality, and this is making sure that your information is up to date and it's clear. And often we get concerns that come in from schools around this because, parents will outright lie in trying to enroll their child in a school. But you need to get that up-to-date information. And we'll touch on the participation part in a little bit. There was a case in the UK where a company, while trying to comply with the law, went and contacted everyone on their mailing list saying, do you still want to be a part of our mailing list? Which is all right and fine and good. But they sent it to a database that was 2 months old. And in that time, people had already unsubscribed from that database. And it ended up that these people complained to the regulator and they ended up getting fined because they contacted these people. So it's very important that your information quality and your databases and things like that are up to date, and that you're working off a master database of information that can be current. Then we talk about openness. Now, openness is being transparent about what we're doing with data, what data we have. So we need to know where we are storing data so that we can be open and transparent with people when they ask for it. The next one is probably the biggest condition of POPI, and that is security safeguards. Now, this is being sure that there are things like physical security in place at a school, so learners and other people, members of the public, can't get into restricted areas. So it can be physical things like gates, like access control and that kind of thing. But it also ties into controls that are more on the virtual space. So looking after the systems that we have. Do we have good passwords on our systems? Are our systems in places that can't just be accessed by the public or by learners that are curious, or by teachers who are trying to access someone else's information? We need to have safeguards in place for that. And it relates again to policy. It relates to everything we do in a school, really. Then the last one I want to talk about is subject participation. And this is that people must be able to update their information. Now, going back to the school example that I was saying earlier, where parents can lie, that is the parents' problem, really. But what you as a school want to have in place is that you have got a means for the parents to participate and to be able to update their information if needs be, and so on and so forth. Right, so these are the 8 conditions that we need to look at. And your entire privacy program in a school will look into these and how you can comply with each one of these 8 points. Everything from policy to process to how your operations within the school actually work, drilling down even to the classroom level. Right, so these are the conditions, but there are also different ways we need to treat information that is seen as special personal information. Now, this is information like philosophical beliefs or religion. It is race and ethnic origin. It is your trade union membership, so important for teachers that are part of a union. It is political party affiliation. It is health and sex life, so things like allergies become important here. Medical aid information of staff, medical information of learners. It becomes very, very important that this is special information. Biometric information, and then criminal record information. All of these are treated as special information. Now, in this kind of space, we see that things are often processed, like medical information and things like that. Now, what happens within POPI is POPI has a number of ways where data can be processed. So one of those could be consent, which is the most common one that we see out there, and people often tout consent, and parents will be the first to shout consent. But there are other means as well. There's contract, which is if you've had a parent fill in an application form and you are under contract to educate that learner, that allows you to process information. And there are various other methods as well. Now, generally what would happen is if you're processing this kind of special information, you would need additional consent for doing so. But one of the other conditions is that information may be required by another law. So if you have the Children's Act, for example, or the Employment Equity Act, then those would override needing additional consent for this, because this is a legislative requirement that needs you to collect that information. However, if you were collecting this information outside of that kind of requirement, you would need additional consent. So for things like medical information, you may need an additional consent there saying, we are storing details about allergies, about medical conditions, things like that for learners, or depending on the type of school you are, you may collect much more medical information. You may need additional consent from the parents and guardians there. Something to be aware of. Right, so the next part I want to talk about is that there's an additional set of data that's treated quite specially within POPI, and that is details of minors and details of account numbers. So details of minors must be treated very, very carefully, and that's anyone under the age of 18, which basically applies to all the data that we have in schools. So vital that you look after that information with a great deal of care. Part of that is making sure you're using good systems, that you've vetted the systems that you're using, and that there's no unauthorized access available to these systems. The other side of this is account numbers, and account numbers are seen as very, very special pieces of information in POPI, and there are criminal offenses that can be levied if you lose account numbers or you treat them negligently and so on. So vitally important that you consider these two in the context of the school in order to look after the information very, very securely. Right, so what are some of the things you can do? Well, the first is to be very, very educated and learn about the conditions of POPI. And these tie into your school's policies. You want to look at the policies that are in the school. Make sure you have policies covering data protection. What do you do with data in the school? Do you allow paperwork to be passed around, or do you restrict it? Do you have papers handed in and lying on desks? You might want a clean desk policy to stop people from just storing information on teachers' desks or on admin office desks. It's the policies you have that give that accountability and that give you a recourse as well if someone bypasses policy. For example, if you have IT policies in place that show how people can use computer systems in the school, then that is a good way of communicating to the staff that, you can't share this information. You can't hand this out everywhere. It's against policy. Policy is your first sort of safeguard that you have in place. The next thing is looking at the systems you use as a school, mapping out where your systems are, what data is kept in these systems is vital for knowing how to protect it. If you don't know where information is, you can't protect it effectively. So you need to be very, very clear on what systems you're using, what information is stored in each of those systems, and what your risk is there and how you protect it. It also ties into outsourced systems that you use. So if you are collecting information as the school, you are generally seen as a responsible party under POPI. What you then do is you perhaps outsource a system like a D6 that would be your operator that you're handing information to. As a school, it's your responsibility to make sure that the systems you use are secure as well. And that ties into your own responsibility, like looking after passwords, making sure teachers aren't sharing passwords around, admin staff aren't sharing passwords and users, but also making sure that those providers have security in place. So asking them the questions, what are you doing towards POPI? Do you have policies in place? Do you have security in place? You want to be aware of that. Now, the other thing that you need to look at here is that your operations in the school, your processes, that they actually match what your policies say. So the actual physical operations of the school need to match what you say you're doing on paper. If you have processes in place, you can see where data is moving, and you can also see where your gaps are so you can correct them, because that is what we want to do in POPI. We want to do a gap analysis of where we've got data risk and then correct those. Best way to do that, knowing what your processes are in the school. So get some process diagrams in place, get some mapping in place, learn where information comes into the school, where it's stored, where it moves around, and you'll be a long way away on your way to complying with this kind of stuff. Right, so a few quick wins that you can do. Like I said, know those 8 principles, look at the law, have someone read the law. You're going to have someone who is in charge of POPI for the school. And that by default would likely be the principal, or in the terms of a private school, it would be the head of the organization. Then something you want to do is definitely look at those processes, look at the data you have. Where is data sitting? Start getting a record of where your processing happens within the school. What happens in the admin side? What happens in the classroom? Things like mark sheets and all of that do have personal information on them. It is identifiable. You need to know where this information is sitting. You'll find that you generate an astounding amount of information in a school, and it's important to know where it is. The next thing is to be aware of the different agreements you have with parents, with learners. Be aware of where data is coming in. So Look around one day, stand there, go to a classroom, look in cabinets. What kind of data is sitting in cabinets? You need to be aware and think about this kind of stuff. And I mean, we've seen it before in schools where December comes around and we need to do a cleanup and we quickly shovel the data into a cabinet somewhere. That really doesn't help because we're not tracking what data is being stored in there, and there could be some really sensitive data in there. So very important, know the principles, look at your processes, and then become aware of what the Act requires of you in detail. It's not something we're going to get through in just a 10-minute exercise. POPIA is a journey. It's a compliance exercise that is ongoing. Compliance to those 8 conditions is not a destination to be reached. You need to be aware that every time a process changes in the school, you're going to have to update your compliance. And it's something that's going to be ongoing. Now, if you'd want to learn more about this, contact D6's compliance department. We are running various training courses coming up where we will take you through a 2-day course on POPIA, what's required of the school in a lot more detail, along with some policies and templates that you can start using and molding to fit your operations, because that's really where you need to start getting to now. So folks, if you need any more information, please contact compliance@d6ed.co.za and we'll be able to let you know of any training courses and things that are upcoming. And with that, I bid you farewell for now, and I hope to see you on a course soon. Thank you very much for attending this short presentation. Bye-bye.